Before we begin, a quick note. This podcast is a space for storytelling, shared experiences, and community. The views shared are personal and not medical, legal, or professional advice. If you're navigating a situation that requires professional support, please seek guidance from a qualified expert. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Welcome to Who Cares About Me? This podcast exists to create space for caregivers to tell their stories, the good, the hard, and the complicated. There's no judgment here, no right way to do this, just real experiences, reflection, and connection. Each episode features a small group of caregivers sharing what this role has looked like for them. Because caregiving is not one size fits all. If you've ever found yourself caring for a parent or grandparent and quietly wondering, who's taking care of me? Who cares about me? You're in the right place. This is Who Cares About Me, a podcast created to center the voices of parental caregivers. It's the version where you don't step away from your job. You don't pause your career. You don't get a sabbatical. You stay in the boardroom. You stay on the conference calls. You show up to school drop-offs. You keep the machine running. And in between meetings, you and your siblings are arranging care, reviewing finances, making end-of-life decisions, signing documents on behalf of your parents. Caregiving while working full-time isn't just about time management. It's about guilt, resentment. It's about feeling like you're failing everywhere at once. Today's episode is about that invisible weight. I'm your host, Jackie Delogard, a wife, mother, executive in the fashion industry, and primary caregiver to my 82-year-old mom who's living with PSP, a rare degenerative disease. Like many caregivers, I didn't step into this role intentionally. It found me. This podcast exists for the people who show up anyway, the ones who are doing their best without a roadmap, often without recognition, and sometimes without support. This is Who Cares About Me, and today's conversation is about the balancing act of caregiving physically and emotionally while working full-time. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy you're joining us. Today, I'm joined by David Casey. David and I worked together for about 3.5 years and was an incredible mentor and friend to me during this time. David, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jackie. It's been great getting to know you over these past 3.5 years, and I'm really looking forward to diving into this incredibly important topic.
Great. Well, David and his siblings were simultaneously caring for his father, James, mother, Peggy, and his last living grandparent, Elizabeth, for about 5+ years, all of whom, unfortunately, passed away within 16 months of each other. During that time, David was building his career and raising young children with his wife. And towards the end, he described that time as feeling like a funeral director. Such a heavy burden to bear. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story, David.
Thank you.
Well, can you share a little bit about you and your background, where you're from, where your family is based, and what you do in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm a recently retired and shall we say recovering corporate chief diversity officer. Yeah, I had the chief diversity officer for about 25 some odd years. And now I'm just doing advising, coaching, counseling, speaking, writing, teaching, all those things you do when you're retired from corporate, but not done with what all you have to say and do.
So of course, yeah.
That's my professional perspective right now. I am one of 5 siblings. I had another sibling who passed away, unfortunately, when I was 11 years old. But I'm one of 5 siblings now. I am the next to the youngest. I am married. My wife and I have been together for over 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3 adult children. My wife and I currently reside in Florida, although the majority of my family, and this will be important for our conversation later, the majority of our family nucleus is in Indianapolis, Indiana,
Okay.
which is where we're originally from, and that's where all of my siblings are except for one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a Marine Corps veteran, spent 8 years in the Marine Corps. That still is a big part of how I identify and how I conduct my personal and professional lives. And I am a lifelong Indianapolis Colts fan. I didn't care for them when they were in Baltimore, and I don't care for the Baltimore Ravens now, but I'm an Indianapolis Colts fan. So a little bit more about who I
All right.
am.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank
Uh, and let's jump into the family members we were talking about earlier, and would love for you to share their diagnosis and symptoms when you were caring for them.
So Jackie, my wife and I only have one of our parents still living. It's my mother-in-law. So from my parents' perspective and grandparents' perspective, my grandfather passed away many years ago. The two parents of mine and my grandmother were really the ones that I had probably gotten the most involved in, directly involved in from a caregiving perspective. So, my father passed away in November of 2005 from complications related to renal failure. But
Hmm.
prior to that, Jackie, he had been chronically ill for decades. I mean, he was permanently disabled when I was a teenager. As he was
Oh.
working in the construction industry, he fell from some scaffolding and severely bruised his ribs and had a number of other injuries.
Hmm.
So he had been dealing with some level or some facet of chronic illness pretty much my all of my life from my teenage years up through adulthood.
Got
My
it.
mom passed away in July of 2006 from complications related to COPD.
Hmm.
And then she also was diagnosed at one point with stage 4 cancer, lung
Hmm.
cancer, and went through chemo, went through laser treatment, kicked the cancer. But again, she had so many complications related to COPD, being a lifelong smoker, and then having quit towards the end of her life. And then my grandmother passed away in February of 2007. She was 91, and
Hmm.
she pretty much passed away from natural, causes, not really a chronic illness.
Hmm. So it seemed like from a very young age you were already in this world of people who needed extra attention and care, starting with your dad and those injuries. When did things start with your mom, and how was that like juggling the caregiving there? Uh, because obviously your dad was in a position where he probably couldn't do much to help support her. And can you take us back to that time in your life when that began?
Yeah, I was for my dad, his my mom was still in pretty good health when my father was first injured. So when
Hmm.
he was dealing with a number of his disability related injuries over the years, she was his primary caregiver at that point. But later in life, towards the end of his life, he started having issues with. He must have had at least 5 or 6 heart attacks,
Oh
and
my
at
goodness.
least 3 or 4 of those times, the doctors told us, or the hospital told us, he's not going to be coming home from this one. But he recovered, he got well, he went home anyway. So by the time he was at that stage of his life, my mother and all of us were, kind of playing some caregiver role. Uh,
Hmm.
I was in my first kind of like, career pathway to an executive level role as a chief diversity officer. I've been in that role for only 4 years. It
Hmm.
was the first head of diversity role I had ever had. So I'm still learning who I am as a professional. I'm still trying to, build my career, build my professional brand, and these things are going on, and then you start dealing with these things in your personal life, and you're like, okay, how am I going to balance this? So that's where I was in my career, very, very early in my chief diversity officer career stages when my father really started getting chronically ill. The
Hmm.
disability was something that he had managed over a course of time, but then the constant cardiac issues that he was having, and then the renal failure, those were all things that probably really ramped up and were pretty traumatic for him and us. I would say probably the last 4 to 5 years of his life.
Yeah. And you're in the knee deep in your career, and I'm assuming at this point raising young children.
Mhm.
What did a typical week look like for you when you were starting this phase?
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, Jackie, is that I do feel fortunate that I've got, two brothers, one who didn't live in the city, and two sisters. So me, my youngest brother and two sisters all lived in the same city with my parents during this time. So, and then my wife. was an incredible caregiver as well. She jumped in and helped to care for them like they were her own biological parents. You know what I mean?
That's
So
great.
I was fortunate in that regard. But I would say, even still, there's only so much of all of us to go around because all of us were raising families, all of us were, working professionals. So for me, specifically, I would say a typical work week was, putting in the 50, 60 hours at work. And towards the end of both my father and mom's life, really trying to figure out how can I carve time to just be in the same space as them. You get to that point where that they're at a point in their illness where they may not recover. They're probably not going to recover. So you just want to figure out how can I carve out space to be with them, if nothing else. But your kids, they do have practice after school. I'm helping my wife, who is a stay-at-home mom. I'm helping her, with whatever they need for school and for practices and all these different things. And I'm trying to figure out am I giving my family enough? Am
Hmm.
I there for them? And am I there for her as a
Hmm.
partner and a father enough? At the same time, thinking about, wow, what if one of my parents passes away tonight? Am I going to regret that I'm not sitting at their house with them right now?
Yeah.
So those were the kinds of things that I had to bounce around and deal with and try to figure out how to strike whatever the right balance is. Really hard to figure out what balance looks like, but how could I strike the best balance I could amongst all those things?
Did you ever feel like you were living two completely separate lives during this moment? It's a lot.
Oddly enough, even though it's family, right? So, you don't really feel separated in the fact that it's family. But to your point, I'm married, we have young children, I've got my career, and then I've got my parents who are chronically ill. So yeah, you do, or at least I try to figure out how to compartmentalize because I didn't take my kids over there to sit with them, for hours at a time while they were that ill. There was no need for them to have to experience that. So, it certainly felt like when I was in that environment and I was there while they were, struggling with their health, it wasn't that I was detached from my family, but I did want to kind of put some space between those two, because when I was with my kids, I didn't want to be sitting there during a soccer game and not mentally be at that soccer game, but be worrying about my parents. So, yeah, in a way, I think from a survival perspective, I kind of lived or felt like I was living separate lives because I didn't want the burden of what I was dealing with my parents' health care to impede my relationship with my wife or my children.
So it sounds like there was this need to compartmentalize where you were at work, where you were, what you were doing at home, and what you were doing with your parents. And was there ever a moment when you were in one of those three parts of your life where you felt guilty that you couldn't pay attention to one part because you had to pay attention to another? And who was the priority for which week? How did you balance that?
I think Jackie, at any moment and point in time, as I said, I really tried to compartmentalize, but that's easier said than done. I
Sure.
mean, there are times when you're at work and you have to make phone calls to healthcare providers. You have to make phone calls to insurance companies. Again, I was fortunate that my wife helped with a lot of that logistical stuff, and I had siblings who could help with that. But there were things I still needed to do. There were things that my mom was asking me to do and my siblings to do. So you're sitting there at work and you're wondering, okay, are they getting the best care they could be getting today, whether they're in the hospital or at home? Are they in the right financial situation? We going to be able to pay for their health care? I mean, you're sitting at work thinking about these things.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, when you're spending time with your family, there is this guilt that kind of creeps in with, should you be sitting there bedside with them because you may not see them tomorrow? So yeah, I would say that even though you do your best to compartmentalize, you have to give yourself some space and grace to understand that those things there's going to be overlap across
Sure.
all the different facets of your life, if you will.
Yeah. And sometimes those priorities are made for you, whether that's there's a health crisis or something's happening at home and that decision is already made for you. There's no time to even think. You've just got to, execute. Uh, and when we were talking about getting ready for today, one of the things you talked about was your mom wanting you and your siblings to make decisions about your father's health and their finances toward the end of life. And I wanted to understand what that responsibility felt like for you. And was there any doubt from you and your siblings being put in that position?
I didn't want that role. I
Yeah.
did not want that role at all. I, kind of resented having to play that role. And I don't know why I resented it. They took care of me my whole life, and now is my opportunity to take care of them. But there were times where I was just like, I don't want to do this, and not so much on the financial, helping them with manage their finances, but on the healthcare side for sure. My father passed away first, as I said earlier, and towards his end of life, my mother was also starting to get, chronically ill. And there were just times she didn't want to deal with it. She wanted my sister and I to make life decisions for him. We had medical power of attorney, we had financial power of attorney. She wanted us to make end of life, related decisions. And that's the part I really resented. And I think there were several times we pushed back on her and we even said, he was your husband before he was our father. Don't ask us,
Hmm.
don't ask us to make that decision because he's your husband. Um, and I think Jackie, years afterwards, when I had a chance to stop and think back on it, I kind of understand why she may have done that because she didn't want to play that role. She wanted to just be his wife.
Hmm.
She didn't want to be the person who had to make that decision, but neither did we. So it was, there was a level of resentment there. But, as I reflected years later, I kind of understand where she was coming from.
Yeah, because it seems like the weight of those decisions was more of a factor versus the timing of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, again, their generation, they were, my father was born in 1926 and my mom was born in 1936. So they didn't do a lot. They didn't know a lot about how to organize their lives. So even just trying to go through their lives to figure out, are they on the right medications? Who are their doctors for this and that? Where's all their healthcare paperwork? Where's all their whatever paperwork? They weren't really organized. I mean, they were in a generation that just didn't pay a lot of attention to that or know how to do that. At
Mm.
least in the Black and African American community, I don't really know about other communities, but they weren't prepared for that. So yeah, there was some very logistical time consumption as well, just figuring out those day to day. What medicine should they be taking? Are they missing a doctor appointment and that kind of thing?
And when you talk about sibling dynamics around this topic, were there certain siblings that were better at one thing versus the other? And how did those decisions impact how you all managed, all of these requests from your mom?
Yeah, there are certainly different dynamics, right? And I think every family needs to be prepared to understand that. And there are just different roles that people may play. That's okay. Not everybody needs to play the same role or will play the same role. My oldest brother wasn't living in the city, so then it came. So then you have my oldest sister, who was number two, and then you had me as the oldest son. But she and I were both, kind of working in professional settings. So I think my parents just kind of assumed that we had all the skills to take care of their business, right? I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
air quotes around business. So that's a role that she and I played a lot of. And again, I have my wife to help us with some of that. But she and I played a big role in the administration of all their stuff, their meds, their insurance, their finances. So that was the role we played. And my other sister and brother played roles of being able to be there for our parents. And so I think we all did play somewhat of a different role, and that was fine. It worked
Mm-hmm.
out well for us. But that's a discussion families need to have. And especially if
Yes.
there are multiple siblings involved, you all should have that conversation and be okay with what roles that everybody can play and what their strengths are.
Exactly. Because your strength may be I can go to town and advocate when it comes to the hospital, the doctor, bills, whatever that may be. and the other person may not be good at that.
Yeah.
So giving them the role of, okay, you need to come and sit, spend time, make them laugh, make a meal, whatever that is. But to your point, understanding that upfront and aligning on it makes things so much easier, especially if there's multiple siblings involved, right?
Yeah, that's right. And even when it comes, especially when it comes to finances as well, because there may be financial contributions that, the family's going to need to make for their caregiving, and everybody may not be able to do that equally. So I think, being okay and having those discussions as siblings is very important to do as early as you can.
Yeah. Well, before we take a quick break, I want to reflect on a lot of the conversation that we had and talking about this particular guilt that lives inside of working caregivers and the sense that you're never fully anywhere. And it just, this push and pull and, you know, setting aside time for doing your work, meeting with your parents, spending time with your own family, that juggling can be, it could take an emotional toll on many people. So really appreciate your point of view, and hopefully some of this will help some of our viewers and listeners.
I
So let's
love the
take a
way you
break.
bring it up with how sometimes you can feel like you're never fully anywhere. That's a perfect way to frame that.
Yeah. Let's take a break and we'll be back in a minute. All right. Welcome back. We're going to talk about challenges and coping. And one of the things I wanted to start with was some of the services that you had for your parents and your grandparent. Did you all use professional home care services, private caregivers, sending them out to adult daycare centers, or were there facilities that came into play towards the end?
With my dad's healthcare, with the situations he was dealing with cardiac, having going into cardiac arrest and renal failure, a lot of his healthcare was literally provided in a hospital setting. So there wasn't. He actually passed away in the hospital. We
Mm,
never got to a point of hospice care or anything like that for him. With my mom, hers was much more protracted. So there was a mix of in-home care, nursing home care, and then also being in a clinical setting as well. For the in-home care, that was really very, very challenging. You know, we say we have a healthcare system in the United States. System is a very loosely and probably ill-defined word because everything is just there is no system there. You have to figure out, who's going to provide this service and who's going to provide that service, and just even the matter of getting home health care equipment.
yes.
It's not like once. It's not that easy to find a one stop shop solution. So, we looked into some senior services advisors, and we even have met with the social worker at one point. And that individual actually gave us some great advice. And they said that, again, in situations where you have siblings who may be caring for their parents or grandparents, consult a social worker to help you make some of these decisions so that you can put the onus on them and
Mm,
remove some of those potential tensions from the sibling group. So, that's something that people may want to look into, but we didn't really tap into a lot of those services, Jackie, because it actually became more frustrating and difficult at that back then. I think it's gotten much better now, but back then it was difficult to coordinate all of it. So,
it's still tough, by the way.
yeah, yeah,
Very, very tough.
I can imagine. I'm hoping it's better than it was, but I can imagine it's still tough. So we looked at things like, in-home care. My gosh, wow, the
Yes.
expense of that.
Mm,
We were talking about close to $2,000 a week for in-home care for my mom. So we did experiment with that through one of my siblings' churches. They had a church member who kind of did that. They were like a certified nursing assistant. So we tried that, but then their personal schedule got challenging. They weren't working through an agency. They were just kind of doing this on their own. So it's not like on the days that they couldn't come in, we could just say, hey, send us somebody else, you know.
right.
So that was extremely challenging. And then we eventually ended up moving my mom to a nursing home. And I will tell you, and I've shared this with people before, that was the hardest day of my life.
Mm,
I served in combat. I've faced some kind of challenging things over the course of my life, but I would say that day and that moment of moving her out of her house which was the first house she had ever been able to purchase in her life.
Yeah.
They had always rented homes. So this was the first home that they had ever been able to buy. So moving her out of her house to a nursing home was extremely difficult. She looked at me when she was on the gurney because an ambulance had come to pick her up. She looked up at me and said, "I'm never coming back here, am I?"
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was like, I didn't really know the answer to that. I kind of think I knew the answer, and the answer was no, you're probably not. I kind of maybe hoped that someday she would, but I kind of knew better than that. That was incredibly hard. So she spent the last part of her life in a nursing home, and eventually we moved her mom into the same room in a nursing home with her, so they got to actually be in a nursing home together for a period of time.
Oh, that's amazing that you were able to do that.
Yeah.
So, you describe watching your parents, pillars of strength and just raising these four kids and such an inspiration, literally deteriorate physically and cognitively. What was the hardest part about witnessing that shift for you?
So watching any family member decline is tough. But I have to say when I step back and think about what probably struck me the most as this is not who I experienced growing up was my father. My father was 6 feet 6 inches tall, a very big guy. I'm 6'3". I was hoping I'd be able to be as tall as him someday and maybe play in the NBA, but that never happened. But so my father was this 6'6" tall. When he walked into a room, he took up all the oxygen. I mean, he was a dynamic personality, life of the party, had always been. So watching him become frail and moving across that spectrum of being this bigger than life person and personality to being frail, that was probably the most traumatic evolution that I went through with all of their health failing towards their end of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems like maybe and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that your dad's illness was probably more difficult to handle than the other.
I don't know if I would say they were all difficult in their own way, but I would think again, just seeing the starkness of
Mm-hmm.
him going from being this boisterous, kind of leader of the pack personality to needing just literal care. I would say that was the most stark.
Yeah.
It was the hardest from that standpoint, but every single one of them in their own right were, I would say, equally difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of your military training and service come into play while managing this time in your life?
I think the part of my military background, being in the Marine Corps, especially, I'm not knocking on the other services. I'm just saying, but being in the Marine Corps, they really stress upon you, just get it done. Uh,
Yeah.
we used to have a saying that you have 5 seconds to complain about it, then you need to get to actually doing it. So I think for me, just that mindset of you just dig in, you figure it out, you move on, you do what has to be done, just get it done. I think that kind of military mindset was a huge enabler of just not getting caught up in the emotion of it in the way that I couldn't be there for the administrative part of the stuff that I had to do. I think that really helped.
I mean, you have a strong personality. Obviously, your military training makes you such a strong individual. But was there ever a moment where you felt powerless despite doing everything that you could?
Yeah, I think because they all had chronic illnesses that span some amount of time, my father being the longest period of time. But
Uh-huh.
you do get to a point where you kind of in your hearts, or the their healthcare provider will tell you that they're not going to come back from this one. I think when you hear that, that's when you really, really start to feel helpless and somewhat hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of knew it was coming because they're on this decline. They're going through these periods of chronic health, but it's not until you hear it at that moment where they tell you, you need to start saying your goodbyes. If there are any family members who, would like to see them, now will be the best time. I think that's when you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And out of the three of them, my father, my mother, and my grandmother, I think I remember that moment the most clearly or vividly with my mom. And getting a call, I believe it was a Saturday morning, getting a call from the nursing home that, you should come say your goodbyes because she's getting ready to pass.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough that I got there in time to be by her bedside as she took her last breath. Her
Hmm.
mom was still living. Her mom outlived all of her children and her husband, so her mom was still living. And I had the opportunity to whisper in her ear, "You can stop fighting now. We will take care of your mom." And I promise you, Jackie, this is going to sound cliche or like it's in some Lifetime movie, but right after I said that, she took her last breath.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You know, obviously this impacts people emotionally, and it seems like your wife was a huge part of this process. And I'm curious to understand, from your family, how did that impact your wife and kids during this whole time? And I guess, what did your kids learn from this?
Yeah, I think for my wife, while she didn't serve in the Marine Corps, she married somebody who did. Plus, I think it's just part of her own personality. She and I, we grew up together, so we kind of share that same. Let's just dig in and figure it out and do it and do what has to get done. We never spent a lot of time wallowing in, and I don't mean that from a negative way. We never spent a lot of time delving on grief or delving on sadness. Every day we woke up with what do we have to do for them today? Is there a medication they need? Is there a doctor's appointment they need to go to? Is there a home health piece of home health equipment they need? So with her, I think it also gave her another purpose. We had our own children, but it gave her and me another purpose of somebody to take care of, and we just did it. And I think having each other to lean on was a huge benefit and a value for us. With our kids, I think for them, now that they're adults, probably even more so than at that time when they were younger kids, I think now that they're adults, they probably kind of reflect on feeling like they're missing out on not having grandparents around. They still have my mother-in-law, but she's their last living grandparent. So I think now more so than ever, they probably feel that, wow, I wish I had known them. I wish I had more time with them. I think that they're experiencing that now.
Hmm. Hmm. I want to talk about coping and coping with these feelings and how you managed through that, whether that was therapy or journaling or connecting within the community or joining different groups. How did you and your family get through this?
I think for me personally, and I would say for my wife as well, and not even thinking about the corporate structure of the church, but just our personal faith was a huge part of how we got through it. We both believe in someone much larger and bigger than us that has a plan. We both believe in the fact that we're going to see all of our ancestors and loved ones again at some point in the future. So I think for us, having that being grounded in faith was a huge support. And honestly, Jackie, we talk about the demands of all these other things in your life. I think leaning into all the other things that can take you away from that. At some point, you use the term, not feeling like you're fully anywhere. But at some point, being at work was and being able to focus on that kind of took me away from the downsides of dealing with a chronically ill parent or grandparent and being at a soccer game with my kids. So I think finding some other things that actually can engage you physically and mentally in addition to what you're navigating with caregiving. Those are great ways to find that support system and that structure to help you get through it as well.
I was having a conversation with someone about work and going through these challenges and these life changes during your career and the comfort level of sharing that with your boss,
Yeah.
coworkers, other people within, your corporate structure. How did you feel about sharing it, or did you even share it? Because some people, they don't want to share their business.
Yeah.
Others feel like it's cathartic to share it with other people. How did you manage that in the workplace?
I was lucky and blessed that I worked in a workplace with people that I could share it with and be open with. My sister and I, my oldest sister, who was, and myself, who were kind of like the administrators of everything, we actually were working at the same company at the time our mom passed away. And I'm going to say his name because I hope he doesn't mind. But I think so highly of the fact that he was this kind of leader that I want to say his name out loud. We had a CEO at the time, a guy named Larry Glasscock, and he knew that our mother was ill. And this was just kind of the CEO he was. I mean, we were a Fortune 50 company, right? So big company. It wasn't like, some mom and pop shop. But he knew enough and cared enough. Every time I had a meeting with the CEO of the company, Larry, we could not get into any of the business of the meeting without him asking first, "How's your mom doing today?" And to me, that just meant the world that, I could bring that part of who I was to the workplace and have the CEO of the company know and care enough to ask me that question every day. My sister's experience was she ran into a situation once where she did not get an opportunity to engage in something professionally. I think it was could have been a project, or I forget exactly what it was, but her boss said something that really kind of frustrated her. And this is where I think you kind of just have to know who you're working with and what the culture is of the people you work for. Her boss didn't give her an assignment or didn't put her on a project because her boss, I think, was trying to do the right thing and assumed that because she had these caregiving responsibilities, she didn't want to do these other things. And that frustrated my sister because she was like, "Don't make that assumption. Again, maybe I need to be doing that work, that stuff at work, because I need a release. I need some time away from the caregiving." So I would just say, for me personally, I think it's I think it's good for people to understand that you're dealing with these things because you don't want them to make assumptions about why you may not be all mentally there on a certain given day. But you also need to be very open and honest with them to say, "Don't make assumptions about where you think I am or how you think I'm doing without talking to me first, because you don't want your career to get derailed based on people's false assumptions."
Yes, I can 100% relate to your sister and seeing certain situations and opportunities not come to fruition because someone's making an assumption that you don't have the time or the capacity to do something. But we definitely need more CEOs like Larry in the workplace, and hopefully podcasts like this can get the word out and let people know that it's okay to give people that flexibility and acknowledgement and show a little empathy when we're all going through this, because there is definitely more focus on caregiving for children and the flexibility there versus caregiving for parents.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll gain some more knowledge out there for people, and we'll start to see some changes. So I want to talk about financial stress and how that adds another layer of pressure while working full time and taking care of your immediate family. You said that that's something that resonates with so many families, and it feels like elderly people have to be either wealthy or destitute to afford proper care. What did you learn about the cost of care that really shocked you? I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, just the home caregiver costs, but was there anything else that really shocked you?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, we talked about the healthcare system, quote unquote, being so disjointed. And for me in particular, I'm thinking about Medicaid and Medicare.
Mhm.
Obviously, with my parents' ages and my grandmother's age, they were eligible for and on Medicare. But then also trying to get them the financial support they need for in-home care, for home health equipment, for their medications. At one point, I think we had even heard that they had to sell their house to be eligible to be eligible for financial assistance through Medicaid. So
Yes.
I'm sitting there thinking, first of all, this is the first house they've ever owned. I do not want to tell them they have to sell it to get a wheelchair or a bed rail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, how perverse is it that we have a system that says you have to absolutely be destitute before the system will help you financially to stay in your home, to receive the kind of health care you should receive in your home? So, yeah, I was very surprised by that. I had never had to deal with that before, and I didn't understand how, again, I hate to use the word perverse, but that's what it felt like to me. How incredibly perverse it was that my parents weren't poor enough to get the level of financial assistance we would like to have been able to get for them to afford $2,000 a week for in-home health care.
Yeah, I saw a post on one of the groups that I'm on, and someone was just distraught dealing with Medicaid and having to go through a lawyer who wanted to charge them $16,000 to get them through the Medicaid process.
Mhm.
That to me is a whole nother issue, that it's so complicated and there's so much red tape that you have to spend tens of $1,000s for a lawyer to get you even through it, on top of the other things, to your point, selling your house, selling your assets. It is perverse. And why this still is happening is just completely beyond me.
Yeah, yeah. And you
Um,
want, especially if you get to the point of having to, have your parents or grandparents be in a healthcare setting, and that's a difficult conversation too, right?
mhm,
So, we tried to figure out what are the things we could do for our family that would allow us just to be there and be family for them and not be their healthcare providers, right? Whether it was in home or in a facility. And at one point, for us, for our family, it made sense to put my mom and put my grandmother in a nursing care or a nursing home facility. But Jackie, even when we started researching those at the outset, and again, this was some years ago, so I don't even know what it is now, but for a quality nursing home, we were looking at about $100,000 a year. And
jeez.
again, $2,000 a week for in home care. And they weren't eligible for any financial assistance for any of that as long as they owned a home.
Mm,
How that just does not make any sense to me whatsoever.
yeah. So within 16 months, you lost both of your parents and you lost your grandmother. What does that do to someone to experience that much loss in such a short window?
It was really really just a very very dark time, especially losing both of your parents in that time frame. My grandmother was 91. I mean, we had hoped that she would stick around, as long as she could, but she was 91. My father was 79 when he passed away. My mom was 69. That was way too early.
Yeah.
So to lose them that early in their lives and in my life and in such a close proximity, that was extremely difficult. It was hard to focus on anything else. It was I and what made it even more especially difficult for me and I think my sister, who were handling all the administrative stuff, we didn't feel like we had time to grieve. We didn't feel like we had time just to sit there in sorrow, either with them or after they had passed, because we had stuff to take care of, you know.
Hmm.
So that made it extremely difficult. I would just describe that period of time in my life literally it's just a black period. It was extremely tough.
Yeah. I'm so sorry you went through that, David. And, you know, I think people can say, be strong, you can get through it. Sometimes you don't want to be strong. Sometimes you just want to be sad and vulnerable and mad, because that
Yeah,
that is a lot to take in within 16 months,
yeah,
especially people you loved and cared about so much. So I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And I know, you know, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you just didn't feel like it was fair, especially at your age and within your career, that you just don't have them anymore.
yeah.
And sitting here today, how does that feel, knowing everything that you and your family have accomplished?
It's a two-sided coin. One side of the coin is I miss them terribly and I feel cheated not having them in my life and not watching my kids grow up to become adults. I feel cheated that they never got to see that. I feel
Hmm.
I feel cheated that they never got to see Obama elected. So the first
Yeah.
so I feel like they were cheated, and I feel cheated out of a lot of things. If you flip the other side of that coin, I feel blessed. I feel blessed because now when I want to communicate with them, I don't have to get in my car to drive to their house. I don't have to pick up the phone to call them. I can communicate with them directly, and I do that daily. So it's a two-sided coin that you do feel cheated that you don't have them in this physical realm anymore. But I feel blessed that they are very much there with me every day spiritually. There was one day I looked in the mirror when I was shaving, and I swear to God, I saw my father's face, and it freaked me out. What are you doing in my mirror while I'm shaving? So yes, definitely for me personally, it's a two-sided coin for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a couple questions for you personally. And the first question is, when you're running on empty, who actually cares about you?
My number one co-pilot is my wife for sure. Again, I am 57 years old. Proudly, I will say that out loud. Soon to be 58, and we have been together since we were 16 years old. So she knows me probably even better than I know myself. So I
Yeah.
would say that I'm very lucky that I have a lifelong spouse and partner who can care for me when I need to be cared for.
Yeah. And what's one small thing that made your caregiving day lighter when you were deep into it?
I think for me, Jackie, even though sometimes it was very stressful and to be honest, sometimes even felt like a burden because you have all these other things in your life. I think what made my day a little bit lighter was feeling like I'm honoring these people who raised me. They sacrificed so much. They gave so much to take care of us. So, you kind of get past the burden part of it. And you feel like, when you leave their house at the end of the day or the hospital room or whatever, I felt like, those couple of hours we just spent together, I was able to honor them and give back to them for everything they poured into us.
And what would you say to another caregiver listening right now that went through the same thing that you did?
Again, going back to this notion of space and grace, I would say just understand and be comfortable with and sit with the fact that self care is health care, and self care is not selfish. That you really have to get comfortable with that and understand that, and just know that your parents, your grandparents wouldn't expect that of you. So I would say that self care is not selfish would be one key takeaway that I think caregivers need to really lean into and sit with.
Yeah. So, David, we talked about caregiving while working full time and the fact that it's not just about time management. It's about carrying grief into meetings. It's about reviewing financial statements while planning everything from where you're going to put your parent to funerals. It's about being someone's boss at 10 a.m. and someone's son at 6 p.m. And when caregiving ends physically, the relationship simply changes form, and you can communicate with them directly from your head and your heart, like you talked about. And I want to thank you for naming what that felt like and naming that guilt, the resentment, the anger, the helplessness, and the blessings towards the end. And I really am so honored that you were here and shared your story and your vulnerability and just being a part of this process for everyone that's listening. So thank you so much, David. I really appreciate you being here.
The feeling is quite mutual, Jackie. I have to say thank you for giving me the space to put that out there and hopes that it'll be a benefit to someone else. And I know you come at this from also your own lived experience. So thank you for creating this space for all of us.
Well, thank you, and thank everyone for listening. Take care. You can listen and subscribe to Who Cares About Me wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to follow, connect with us, check out resources, or share your story, head to Who Cares About Me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, subscribe on Substack and YouTube, and like, or visit whocaresaboutmepodcast.com. Who Cares About Me is hosted and produced by me, Jackie Delagard. Clarence Steele is our editor and producer, and also created our theme music. And graphics created by Jonathan Delagard, Apollos Arts, LLC.